Good morning. I guess we've had a baby, right? I don't know. She was supposed to be induced last week, and she's not here this week, so that could be because she's had the baby. So, oh well. But today is the peak of the course for me, because Hegel's my favorite, or was. I mean, he's not a contemporary, of course, so there's lots of contemporary favorites. But Hegel was the one that kind of pulled me out of the accumulation of depression that I had as a philosophy major, to discover every new philosopher that I learned about that was so thrilling got destroyed by the next one, and so eventually you begin feeling like, there's not going to be any success story here. This is just a depressing subject because apparently we don't know anything. And that of course really gets serious with David Hume, who succeeded in convincing not only me, but basically everyone that read him, especially Kant, that he was right, that if you're totally dependent for your knowledge on your impressions that you have at the moment, then all you know are those impressions, and you can't assume your memory is correct. You can't assume that cause and effect is necessarily the case. It's just happenstance, habit of mind, habit of experience, whatever. But that's not proof, not in the strict kind of mathematical sense. So that was very depressing, and as a result of that, science officially kind of doesn't, God bless you, doesn't say that it's proven anything. It's all instead hypotheses now. But that actually turns out to be a strength of modern science. But in any case, it was still depressing to feel like you didn't know anything. Then Kant, as we looked last week, came up with his response to David Hume and came up with an a priori, that is capable of knowing things in response to David Hume's dilemmas. And those were in the brain. So his Copernican revolution, as Kant called it himself, was to basically say, we've been looking all along in the wrong place. We've been looking at what we can observe in nature for the structure of nature, when all along it's actually, as far as Kant was concerned, imposed on our perception of things by the structure of our mind. So the question I ask in test 3 concerning Kant is, how did Kant's philosophy basically lead us to the contemporary psychology that we still look at? And the issue there, of course, is absolutely still relevant. What in the human mind, and that's not just the cultural mind of Westerners, but the human mind in general, leads us to see the universe the way we do. And that's still, of course, a serious, active study that we have psychology, the science of psychology, doing, trying to understand, well, how do we perceive things? What does structure the mind so that it reacts in a certain way? A quiz question I had, how does, the contemporary social media impact us? Remember, there's kind of a theme, a separate theme in the course that as we go through various developments in human understanding, what we end up with are changes in the way we perceive things. So the concept of ideas, thank you, Plato, gave us the idea that there were ideas, although he thought they were extremely abstract and not material at all. His student Aristotle came along and developed a completely different point of view that leads us to think everything is substance, material, and even our ideas are essentially based on our observations of the structured things in our experience. And so he sets us up with categorical reasoning, which is still the main structure for many of the languages that we think in today, such as English, the European languages, the Greek-influenced languages, basically. Although notice out of the 7,000 languages we have, there's actually not that many languages that really are structured in the categorical framework of thinking that we get from Aristotle. But still, that structures so much of our thinking, especially since those languages like English, Spanish, French, German too, are very popular world languages. I think Chinese and Hindi are Hindu. I'm not even sure how you pronounce what the name of that language is, but those languages clearly are by population more than the Western European languages, and Indian languages do seem to have categorical structure, but Asian languages, as we've discussed, do not. And so there's clearly a difference in the way people, based on their language, perceive the world. But that was Aristotle, and then we go on, and each step of the way we end up, as I mentioned, Eric Havelock in his book, The Muse Learns to Write. Each of these stages gives us a different way of perceiving the world. And there was, remember, the Toronto group gave us the medium is the message, which was very popular. When was that? I don't remember. The 50s? 1950s? So, when is this? 64. Okay, so the 60s, I guess. So the medium is the message, not the massage. Wherever that is, no. Where did we get that? The message, not the massage. That's silly. And Eric Havelock was one of his fellow faculty members at the time. Neil Postman, by the way, this was Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is a book that is fascinating, talking about that. But their concern was TV at the time. Part of what this group was concerned about was the impact that TV was going to have on the learning and the mind of the people. Sit your child down. This is Neil Postman in his book. If you sit your child down in front of TV and he's learning Sesame Street and he's learning his ABCs, or she's learning her colors or whatever, what's the main thing that the child is learning? How to watch TV. Right? So when you apply that same focus on the medium, our contemporary medium is drastically different, and we're in the throes of really a revolution in how the media interacts with us, how our minds interact with us, and so the question I had is, how does contemporary media affect you? Is it distracting? Well, everyone tells me yes. Everyone tells me that it's a serious issue for them in one way or another. But of course it also has lots of power. Why was TV so serious a change when it came, the visual media of TV, plus also movies, of course, was very powerful, much more powerful than a book. You have to train yourself to sit and read a text. It seems like you don't have to train yourself to watch a TV. You take a little infant, hopefully, You don't have to say little when you say infant, right? Not usually, unless you have a really big infant, which I don't know that there are that many of those. But in any case, you put a child in front of a TV and you don't have to tell them, okay, now what you do is you watch this area. And no, you don't have to teach kids to do that. They do it. But of course, if you teach them how to read a book, you don't just put a book in front of them. They eat it, That's the way kids deal with books, etc. That's why we have board books, right? Books that are so stiff that they can't eat them. Right? That's just true. That's true. I've bought plenty of those myself, right? But once you get to college, you don't need board books. You can read other kinds of books. If you've been training yourself gradually to increase the difficulty level of the reading that you're doing. And yes, that's going to have an impact not only on the way you learn, but also the way your brain structures its experiences, right? We know this now from psychology, that as you're looking at a screen, that's going to change the neural networks involved in your learning what's going on compared to a book. So if you sit down for the first time and you try to read an 800 pound, it could be 800 pound, an 800 page text like Jared Diamond's Collapse, for example. As I had one student, who started doing that. I want to read that book. He got the book, and he sat down and he started to read it, and he got up to page 3. And he looked at me in class afterwards, and he said, "How do you read a book?" Because he couldn't get past page 3. He didn't have the kind of attention span, really, to do that kind of thing. You have to work your way up to it. And what is it? It's muscles. It's just like doing push-ups. If you suddenly decide, I'm going to do push-ups, you can't start off with 100, right? You have to start off with, a few, right? In any case, the same thing, of course, affects the brain. Well, now if we're primarily interested in media, that's going to affect how we learn. That's going to affect our attention span. It's going to affect how we logically think out problems and so on. So the medium in that sense is still the message, right? What are you doing when you're learning how to scroll or watch TikToks or TikTok ticks, whatever those things are that people watch today, right? That's going to I've read, because that's my main still way of learning things, is that people that they get addicted to those, they sit down and 4 hours later they've still been just watching these, right? And they're addicting. They give you lots of reward, psychological reward for watching them. You want to keep watching them. They're powerful, etc. So, good question. So psychology is still trying to figure out how we are influenced by things. Surprised it doesn't mention Eric, because Eric was part of that too. Let me find that. You'll remember this, because I've mentioned it before. So with Plato, we see the movement from oral learning to written learning, and how much of an impact that had. So that was stage one, in a sense, that we look at today. We might go even further back and say language, first off, had to be the biggest thing to impact learning. When we talk about the question about what is a person, looking at test. It's being silly again. here. Last question. What is a person? Our requirements, it seems, is that you